I got the invitation to come and to have a kind of two-way interview with you. I was somehow suspicious in a way that I can't quite explain.
So was I. I didn't know what the motive was of the people inviting us.
Yeah.
Because in fact, our praxis coexisted quite comfortably within the same contexts. Because they're talking about two different things.
And I think there's also something interesting about the ways in which then we might or might not intersect. I guess as I received the invitation, I was thinking, what does that enforced intersection mean? That we're
Called upon.
Called together.
I don't know. Look at Jazz World. We've all grown up with these strange cassettes of two musicians who you read the stuff, they didn't even like each other. They got up and they did this wonderful work together, and it's one time. So anytime that I find myself in these situations, I always figure, okay, this might be the riff, that's the one time, but it's one time, it's not a marriage. I don't want to fuck up somebody's day on their way to work. I want to fuck up their whole life. It's a quote, and I've said it before, and I really mean it. I want to give something that when somebody understands the meaning and they accept it, it does necessitate them changing the way they either see the world or live in the world. And that's what art's supposed to do. It's supposed to present something that's showing another way to approach things. Approach.
I think a lot of the strategies of my work are related to the form of distribution that happens when something circulates. So I don't necessarily put a burden on the encounter that one person might have with one piece at one moment to change them, and that the work on the street is very small. So this idea of it as an intervention is something that I resist.
A manhole cover is basically small in terms of what they call public art. It's an intervention. People do see it, but I want to change their logic pattern. I don't want to deal with the behavioral pattern.
What's the difference?
Behavioral patterns are the way people see themselves, the way they are. Logic patterns are the way they think about what is already an ipso facto fact. If you're telling somebody that racism is bad, that's trying to change a behavioral pattern. If I can show somebody that you gain enormous freedom by not being a racist, because that allows you then to be who you are, and in changing that from the logic from art, that changes the behavioral pattern, or at least it dulls the aggression towards other people and objects. You use your person as the stage. Your platform is a platform for civil rights, for the fact that female people have feelings, the same as the abstract expressionists were invented to show that males had feelings. That's all. That female people have feelings. They don't just have a role.
That's not exactly how I would describe it.
I know it isn't, but I'm being a little bit, I'm being me.
If I have been mobilized biographically by a moment, it's a moment of the AIDS crisis, where there was an urgent aim and a need and a want and a set of politics and a set of art practices that were interested in affecting that. A set of goals. And it wasn't a civil rights platform. It was about that need and the urgency of that need being addressed by the state, the government,
by the people who had access to do something about it.
Yeah. For me, the difference is to say, and this is where the question of belonging comes in, that I've also been mobilized as an artist by a set of political practices that have used lack of belonging or difference or a kind of otherness to affect change rather than a kind of assimilation. It's not a separatist goal. It is to say that difference and a recognition of difference can be something that pushes change.
I don't believe in assimilation. I don't believe that will accomplish anything. But normalization, yes.
For me, particularly working on the street, I always make it a point to not say that I'm an artist, to explain exactly what I'm doing.
I always make it a point to say I am, and that's the thing, because I do things in the street and things with people, and I just did one in Castiglione where we built a statue, basically, but it's not really a statue, it's a public piece. And it was designed for children, right to the point that they wanted a monolith and they got something a meter high. We had 5 classes of children. We had like 500 children, all lined up. The minute they said you can go, they all ran, and exactly, I was so proud. The little ones hid in the corners, used it as protection. The older ones went up on the top. Some used it as a climbing thing. They all knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they did it. That's my idea of public intervention on the street, but they knew it was art. Art does offer another reason. It offers some sort of a dignity of relationship of human beings to objects that doesn't have a metaphor. I like that.
I march in the parade of freedom, but as long as I love you, I am not free. We must speak with the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. I found the paradox that if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only love. Mother Teresa said that. I had never heard it before. But she's talking about loving bunches and bunches of people till it hurts. She's talking about loving the people of the world till it hurts. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to love you. I only know how to love you. I love you. I love you. I love you.
My move to the street came from a question of speech. I speak a love address to an unnamed you, that if I were to do that inside, it becomes theater.
Yes.
When I'm out on the street, it's a wholly different operation, that it becomes material. That in fact, what I am doing, literally, is speaking to a group of passing individuals on the street and addressing them. So I'm curious, in a sense, if this question of address, if the positions of a speaker and a listener, or if any of the sort of aspects of speech are relevant to you in the text works that you do in public.
Me? No, they don't work the same way. Remember, I'm sorry to sort of like parse this, but the minute you have a microphone, it's street theater.
I don't agree.
You don't agree? Okay.
No, because I don't think that the public, even in Midtown Manhattan, had any tangible access to a genre that I could call street theater. I think they have much more tangible access to genres of a political speech, a kind of political theater, but I do not classify that in the context of the genre of street theater.
When I do put something up that's available on the street, I think of it in terms of graffiti with meaning.
But do you think then of the manhole piece? Are you saying it references graffiti? It's in relation to graffiti,
it is, in fact,
it is
graffiti?
A
form of graffiti.
It is graffiti. The conditions of speech are something I think a lot about. I've always been fascinated by communication, something I could call miscommunication or a misinterpretation or a kind of missed encounter that for me is extremely productive. My investment in psychoanalysis is that I may be talking to you and you may be hearing something that is that comes from a whole other set of drives, interests, wants, conditions, etc. And those I find really generative. It's not about relativity. It is about an unpredictability between me and a receiver, or between the work and a receiver. For me, where as an artist, the space of working is also the space of doing, is also the space of learning what it is I'm doing, which is probably also why I very often use performance or use my own persona.
Such a nice word, persona.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's really depressing to hear people talk about me like I'm dead. I can't explain what it's like.
What it does.
What it does is that it begins to convince people that maybe I'm dead. And if everybody is convinced that I'm dead, then it gives the FBI an excuse.
Well, it makes the FBI.
if everybody's convinced that I'm dead, well, it gives the FBI an excuse to come in here and get me out. To come in here and try to pull me out. If Mr. Bates, I'm sure that Mr. Bates understands that if the FBI has to come in here and get me out by force, then that they won't have time to decide who not to kill. They'll have to kill everybody. They'll just have to kill? They'll just have to kill everybody. They'll just have to kill everyone. I don't particularly want to die that way.
Late to the proper movement, in a sense, because I was born in 1970, so second wave feminism and the feminist movement had a kind of a cohesing at that moment that I did not live through. But one of the foundational encounters for me was what is very simply called the personal is political, or a relationship and a disturbance of these divisions between what we could call the private sphere and what we would call the public sphere. So for me, I have been predominantly interested as a reader, as a thinker, as a receiver myself, in these speech moments or texts where those two things are impossible to separate. Yeah, where they're interlocking and impossible to separate. So for me, what was fascinating about the letters, the audio tapes, they were audio tapes that Patty Hearst and the SLA sent to the radio station, which is essentially sending it to her parents vis-a-vis the public.
Which was they had to use public access.
Yeah. What those texts demonstrate for me is some kind of coming to a political subjectivity. It's a coming to a very specific form of political subjectivity because she was captive.
Captivated.
Captive and captivated. In that place, it's very hard to say, was she really mimicking somebody else's words, the SLA's words? Was she coming to these words herself for the first time in her youthful 19 years of bourgeois upbringing?
I think it was rather haute bourgeois.
Yeah, yeah, true. My interest has been to get to this line, this seam of the public and the private. Because political speech itself, the speech that a president gives to so far, in this country, his citizens, is always intended to address us in our person, in our individual personhood. That's how political speech works, to mobilize us as individuals so we feel spoken to.
I have this really stupid thought that we don't know each other, we don't know ourselves. And I always think that my making art and placing it in the world gives somebody a means to get through. They can understand the relationship to a glass. Once they understand that, then they can worry about the content of what's in the glass and what it has to do with them. So it leaves it open, because I think this thing of misunderstanding is still a Rashomon thing. The games that children play where you tell a story and the other one tells the same story and the same story and the same story, and it comes out the other end. But you're using art as a means for a platform for things that you deeply believe, and if you could say them, you will be able to understand them better and move on to the next phase of what it is that should be done. Since in fact, the message is not the content is this interaction within the society.
Absolutely. The content is the set of relationships.
You're not in any different state or any different thing than I am.
Probably
just doesn't look
not.
the same. It just doesn't
Probably
look the
not.
same.
Well, I do think that we have a different relationship to history. Being born in 1970 made some kind of unexplainable, inexplicable mark on me that I think I have spent much of my life trying to understand. I was pressed and formed in certain moments and in relation to certain moments differently than others. Okay. So this moment when I came to New York in 1991, when I was 21, pressed itself upon me in a way that I have to reconcile even as I move farther away from that moment. So it's not about nostalgia, it's not about a loss for anything. It's about recognizing the potency of a certain kind of cultural
and its effect on you.
Yeah.
But you have to put into account how you were formed and what you formed from. But I don't know if it's anybody's business when you make art.
It's my business, and it affects the work I make. It affects where I go. It affects what I'm interested in. It affects it affects deeply how I see my role as an artist. So when I say that that's my business, it maybe goes back to your assertion that we don't know ourselves, and in some ways we are trying to understand ourselves. I am always trying to understand myself in relation to the collectivities that I am implicated in, that I sometimes affiliate myself with, and sometimes am affiliated with by the happenstance of my birth and my place of birth and my, therefore, nationality. I think that ends up having a lot to do with art in the sense that art is a conveyance of some sort, that a work...
It's a platform. That structure itself functions as a platform. Then you can be judged on your style choices. You can be judged on this, not judged as your value, judged as the context that it's going to be used in, or how it's first approached. I mean, I don't really, as a general rule, care if I have a piece that really works, whether it's in lipstick on the wall or chalk, or whether it's beautifully installed. It is just basically emotional for me at the moment. If there are means to put it in a certain way, I will do it. And if there's no need, I won't. You too.
No.
Or not. That's the problem.
No.
Yeah, I think not. I think you would. There is a choice.
The moment of its conveyance is a moment of its making, that the idea does not exist prior to it.
Yeah, it becomes an object.
Which I think is a bit
moment.
different. I think that's quite a bit different than much of your work, maybe not all of your
My
work.
work is always in the past tense. It's always something that somebody made. It's never telling anybody how to make anything or what to do. And they don't have to do anything in order to know what it is. Okay, but
And
that's my
also...
own thing. I fail sometimes, I'll screw up, but that's
Yeah.
my intention. It is an object,
Yeah.
It enters the society, somebody happily finds some use for it, and there it is, it's an object.
And I think I would speak of my work predominantly, even the work that has objectness
Yes.
as an encounter.
But is not that encounter between two human beings or 10 human beings objectified?
It has material. It
Then
has,
it is an object.
My feeling is that your object, a piece, has a objectness and a specificity to it that you can grasp prior to its conveyance, so that you know what it is, and then it may be conveyed in many different ways.
I know what it is. Yes, that's true. I know it is.
I don't always know what it
discovering
is. I'm very often working in the space of its conveyance. I'm curious whether you feel like you were informed by feminism as an artist, or whether you feel like your work was informed by feminism.
I don't know. I don't like the word.
Feminism?
No, but it's a word. It's like I don't like action painting. It's the same thing. I don't like conceptual. I don't understand the word. When it could form itself into being an obvious fact that all the preconceptions were obviously not what they should be, it worked. And that's informed me in terms of what I consider my role, which is, again, about building this dignity. If you can respect a stone, you can respect another human being. You have to know why. Women are on the same level playing field as everybody else, but there is no level playing field. That's my problem.
No,
that's been my anger, but I see it as a civil rights thing. I see it as we lower the dignity of our culture by even entertaining those conversations.
I think that there were a whole host of unfulfilled promises that many people were invested in. And I think that that does have to do with how and when I formed political subjectivity, because I had an experience of being impacted by that moment that was not mine. It's similar to, let's say, the photograph of a political event, where to see the photograph and have an experience of it changing my life changes how I think of success and failure. If I am being impacted on by that event, that memory, that historical memory, then I can't see it as a failure. I encountered the event of feminism, I was changed, and everything about my logic system was changed.
Oh, I see. My problem is, and maybe I can be more explicit, and it has to do with my work as well, I don't see entitlement as being translated as or having anything to do with empowerment. Where entitlement, that's what I'm interested in as a political person. Empowerment is another story. Empowerment does imply a meritocracy. Empowerment does imply responsibility. Empowerment does explicitly demand noblesse oblige. That's where I see in the works that I make, they're dealing first with the essence of entitlement, the responsibility of taking on being an artist and saying you are, is this entitlement. I like to make work that they don't have to know anything about my value structure, it's explicit. You're in a vulnerable situation that they basically have to ascertain your value structure in order to deal with you. Because of the confrontation. The reason I try to avoid confrontation is that they have to then ascertain, are you more powerful than them? Are you more legitimate? Are you admirable? Are you completely anathema to their existence?
I think the only place I would challenge is this idea of value. When I confront a public, I don't think that it's necessary to compute or read my value system. I think that there is a proposal I make through embodiment that is that does have positionality. It's not a wash.
Did you ever go cruising in a bar?
Yeah.
And there's somebody who hits your keys for whatever reason. As you begin to develop the conversation, you begin to think in terms of future, and you begin to think in terms of, can you accommodate the value structure? I think everybody does it with everybody.
But if you use that same analogy, that you're in the bar, and what you're computing is a moment, you're seized by something.
Yes,
it's them,
absolutely.
It's a projection of
Also,
yourself
you have
in them,
needs.
it's their projection, you have needs. But when I hear you speak about value and the necessity to compute value, I think of it as objective and not ephemeral. For me, in the scene of attraction, I don't talk about it in terms of value. I think attraction as an analogy is quite interesting for me in the space of my work, and desire, and the way in which desire...
We try to entice people to pay attention to us. We do. And anybody who says that they don't is an ivory tower artist.
Yeah. But in the space of the work, I don't necessarily know. I'm not sure I know my own values in that moment, in that encounter. I know some of them, but I don't have a set of prescribed values that that for me need to be uncovered in order for that encounter to happen. That encounter is all bound up in an attempt to understand place, position.
God.
You
Where
don't
have you
agree?
been all my life? Somebody who doesn't have prejudgments. I do. I do. And I can. It starts with a sense of smell and a sense of everything else. And,
But that's all happening in the encounter itself.
yes, but
That's
it's
being
all.
formulated
But it's
in the
all
encounter.
going through a computer that's got all.
I think we just call it something different. I think that what you're calling value, I would call, subjectivity. I mean, it's me.
I don't know why you call it subjectivity. You are a professional artist. You have a place within the society. You assume responsibilities. You can be punished for what you do. You can be praised for what you do. That's not subjective anymore. You know exactly what the fuck you think.
No, I'm not thinking of subjectivity as the opposite to objectivity. I'm thinking of it as I have a singularity. It's not relativism. Who I am formulated in relation to all sorts of pre-given structures.
I mean, come on.
Exactly. Like
We all formulated. I grew up and developed an absolute hatred of ethnic culture. All ethnic culture. I don't mind ethnic diversity, but I don't like the pressure.
Which is
of
to say the
ethnic culture.
identification?
The pressure of it. You have to be polite because it's another human being, not because it's from this island or that island or this grandmother. And that's what I meant about entitlement and empowerment. The empowerment is you're going to find it absolutely distasteful. But you will end up defending its existence. But you still will find it distasteful. And I don't believe in ethnicity. I think that everybody makes these compromises that artists are not supposed to make. Gender is ethnic, it's all the same. It's an ethnic identity. There's a way that girls draw. There's no way that girls draw.
I don't resist or refuse that identity. That for me, it's something that is important to understand as part of a whole system, though we are both very invested in staking out positions. You a position that says that's distasteful, and me a position that says that's absolutely foundational to how we get constructed as singular persons. So I can't ignore it. I can't refuse it. I can't brush it to the side because
you don't want to.
Because I don't want to. I moved to the street because I wanted to engage at certain conditions around speech that could only happen on the street. And so I'm curious for you, what is the space of public work for you?
I never made a site-specific work in my life. And things that really function, like the Vienna Flakturm, the tower, everybody was reading it as if it had something to do with Kristallnacht, as if it had something. No, I was trying to show that there was a difference when you hear beer bottles breaking at night, in the night, and when you hear beer bottles breaking during the day, it's a different sound. It was all, but of course they can build their own metaphors off of it. That's why we use peace of the night for the German instead of still of the night. I really do like using language as opposed to building it, is that it will translate into a vernacular. The work should be pared down to its absolute bare minimum and presented in the most elegant manner possible to try to build a design that they can understand that it's not against them, but it's not them. It doesn't have anything to do with them, but the content does. And their child can use the content and they can use the content on the same level, but its form is different. That's my only way of doing it, but you're in a different situation. Your issues are not site-specific. Your intentions are not site-specific, but you're trying to adapt to the audience that you're coming to. I don't. I really don't. I'm the old lunatic that stands up quietly and says what they have to say, and if it's take the bagel from Hegel, or if it's after Marx and Angels, it's what it is. It doesn't go anywhere else.
The question of adaptation is also a question of translation, which you've of course addressed very directly. The challenge, and it's an interesting challenge, can be to determine the whole realm of things that need to be translated. Because on one hand, it's not just the text and the language, but it's the context that goes along with the text. Because
if there is a context,
which very often in my work there is a reference, as you said, of the Vietnam. Of the Vietnam sign, or Reagan's speeches and what that may have meant, or the Patty Hearst story. As you, I'm invested in not creating a frame that is a explanatory frame, but allowing that context to become a part of how the text is actually spoken.
Why don't we call what I make what it is I'm showing, and what you make what it is you're showing?
I'm saying, speaking.
Showing.
Demonstrating.
The reason that I felt comfortable about sitting down having a conversation was that you show.
I do show.
You don't tell.
But we think of it as demonstrating, is in the realm of a kind of Brechtian demonstration. It's me and then the thing that is being referenced, and all of that together forms a showing. It's true.
Brecht doesn't show, he tells.
But he tells.
Wonderfully, but he tells.
He tells in order to show.
No, you can't do that.
No,
you can't tell in order to
show.
show. Once you've told, you've told.
But the Brecht that I find so intriguing is the Brecht of the methodologies, the street scene, this kind of classic example of how the work should operate. That I saw an accident and I'm going to come in and tell you about that accident.
Yes, and I saw a misjudgment, and I'm going to show you the misjudgment. And that's what I meant about the sociology and about things. In telling, it can't be used by a generation unless they take on the value structure and know the history. And I'd like to make art that, I'd really like to make art that the grandmother, the mother, the son, the all looking at it on the different stages that we talk about, has a use for it that has to do with their immediacy. And the only way to do that is to essentially sometimes leave out things.
And so the next day when you saw the headline in the paper about our march, you said now the president would have to respond. You said that many people can't take to the streets for nothing. And the whole next week you woke up early, you went out, you got us 2 cups of coffee and a copy of the paper. We lay in bed and we read each one cover to cover, looking to see what they would say about our work, waiting to find some mention that we had been heard, some evidence that things were shifting, some sign that our movement was a tide that couldn't be stopped, that everyone, young and old, political and apolitical, was prepared to talk about the war and that everyone would want to, that our message would be repeated again and again in 1,000 mouths until the world was full of nothing but voices of protest as far as the ear could hear.
So my question is, why bring love into politics?
There's no love in a love letter. It's an aspiration, it's an appreciation. It's not about love. Love is when you wake up in the morning and the sheets are wet and your skin's dry. That's love. I mean, the other is an appreciation. People write odes to people they never met.
But desire is always a part of politics.
Yes,
And
desire is a
so
part of politics, and getting something is a part of politics.
So it's not to say that I brought it in, but that it's already there. It's a part of it.
But no artist brings anything in. It's already there. Desire is desire. But that's why I'm saying it's not about love. It's not about tenderness. It's about appreciation and dignity.
I explicitly use love as a word, as a textual operation, because people know it. One Wednesday when I was doing the piece, which is called Everything Else Has Failed, Don't You Think It's Time for Love? And I was speaking on the street, and there was a crowd of people who I didn't know who had gathered in front of me for a moment, and someone was crying. And this was intense for me because I am not somebody who believes that my aim is to make someone cry, nor do I believe my aim is to make someone laugh. I think my aim is to speak what I'm speaking and to show.
But it's not in a vacuum.
Yes, and if you use love and in that way borrow a set of ways of talking about love that we have from cultural use, then you interestingly allow people access in a way that is unlike any access I've ever been able to manage in a work before. They can take almost the piece from me. We are then suddenly in the space of each other, and so as I'm talking about, because the love addresses don't talk about love only, they talk about war as well.
Yes.
And that as I'm talking about love and war, that there is something that gets changed in that listening. Why in 2007 in New York couldn't we talk about war on the street? Why does everyone turn away? Why does everyone, why can't people gather around these sets of questions? So that's this use of the indirect to get to something that is actually a form of kind of directed.
Yeah, but that's not a strategy. That's just a formal structure.
There may be a structure.
You're
and a
giving
strategy.
people, I try to give people keys that they can understand. I only use materials that are more or less readily available to people. Also materials that people might have pondered. Literally, and I give them something else to ponder. I give them a combination. And that combination leads to whatever it leads to. And you give them the combination of this hobby of the Western world, the empathy, because in New York City, the class that you're seeing on the street is probably physically engaged. They might have somebody out there. Some boy or girl is in Iraq. This is a country at war.
Absolutely.
It's played down. I mean, we've even had presidents that wouldn't allow photographs of the dead.
Yeah.
Or any recognition of them. It had to be a public television station that started to put the names and the faces on.
Yeah.
The 21-year-olds, the 19-year-olds. We agree politically. And this whole structure that they've set up was to have this sort of like art world thing, that performance and making objective sculpture, and this is different. It's not. And it never was. And until the 90s, it never was a question. A room filled with pillows was just the same thing as somebody standing on the street making a speech. It was a speech. But it turns out, interesting, that our goal is the same. To place things in the world that change people's perceptions and change people's relations